Good day, YouTube. This is Max from MB Development, and as always, welcome to my channel. Today is a bit of a bonus episode. I mentioned in my previous videos that number one, I will be uploading this video probably outside the cycle of my normal uploading schedule, and the coding god smiled upon me and to give me a bit of extra time. So I thought, this is a good time to get it done and um, get it done for you guys. So, yes, that's the first thing. Second thing, this basically marks the end of how to build your own website, but for HTML and CSS. I mentioned this previously. This is not the end of how to build your own website. This is simply HTML and CSS. And there is more things to follow, but I'm going to get into that a little bit later. One of the other things as well is that today I'm not going to do my usual coding bit. We are done with that. That is completed for now. I think I've given you guys enough things to play with. What my idea for today is simply to throw a couple of things out there, a couple of ideas, give you guys a couple of pointers. It's not a lot of them. It's just a few basic things, a few things that you guys can look at and start working on and start working towards. So, without further ado, I am going to get right into it. Number one, my methodologies is not the start and end all of HTML and CSS. There is a couple of ways that you can do a lot of the coding, a couple of different methods, a couple of just methodologies from different ways. Sometimes you will read about a piece of code and it's done slightly different than mine, and a lot of the time that specific developer has got a reason for that. But overall, not the beginning all and end all. I do want to add though is I try to follow best practices as close as possible. And as the same with each one of these little links, I actually went back and had a look at one of my favorite sites and what is, I would say, the gospel of good practice. And if they say it's good practice, I normally go that route. However, you will notice sometimes things is a bit different where the relationship will be in between the type and the href. Small things like that, or the way that an icon is done. Instead of doing it with an ICO, actually using an image. I prefer this way simply because it's an PNG. There's a personal preference, but I also had a look and it's also considered best practice. So yes, I do try to stick to best practices. However, just bear in mind my methodology is not the start and or end all, and those mostly where there's a bit of a discrepancy. I mostly mentioned them throughout, but I mean your basics are fundamentals like your headers, your bodies, your divs, those type of things. Good. Let's move on to the next thing. And this I find very, very handy. I actually have to give credit to one of my old mentors that has showed it to me the first time. It has changed a bit over the years. Most browsers do have it. And that is simply if you right click on an area, I've shown you guys very briefly on view page source, and that will open up a new tab and show you the source code of that page, which is very handy. But another cool trick, and I do believe Firefox, it's not in Firefox directly anymore. I think it's only in the developer edition. And I think, as a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons why I moved over to the developer edition. I might be wrong. The normal Firefox might do this as well. But when you do right click, Google, Chrome does it. Vivaldi does it. Most of the browsers these days, most of your modern browsers do have it in. And that is simply something similar to inspect element. And what that does, it opens up a little inspector at the bottom of the page for you. And you can actually see as you move over a div. I'm just going to close this up tiny little bit. Let's have a look at that div, and you will see that is the content div, where I say blue line, where the first blue line is in my div. It will show up at the top of the page. Just below my menu, you will see there's a blue line that lit up. If I scroll, I'm going to scroll up, get another example. If I hover over the area or the header area, you've got that as well. And when you click on the little drop down, it will show you exactly what's inside of that. And developer edition even shows me what size the original image is and with all the code. Now this becomes very useful. I've found sometimes that the CSS doesn't quite do what I want it to do. And then there might be a layer that I missed, or I missed something small. I missed a div or something. So, especially when I'm working on a new site that I've not worked before and I need to fix a few bugs. And I usually use this just to get a before I even start getting into the code, just to get an idea of what the outline is, and even sometimes potentially I've in some cases seen where the actual problem is. Now, another cool thing about this is if you look on your right hand side, and like I said, Google Chrome, Vivaldi, Opera, all of those, they have got very similar. It might not be laid out exactly like this, but it's very, very similar. You will actually be able to see the styles that is applied to that specific div or tag. The content, you will see it changes content, background color white, the blue line, the elements, which makes this absolutely an invaluable tool. And it even goes as far as to show you exactly where that style sheet is, where that style sheet is located. In other words, where is it reading from, where is it getting its information from. So that is the second tip that I want to give you guys, and I think this will be, well, it is for me absolutely incredibly powerful, incredibly useful. It's got a lot of other things as well that you can use it for, but this is the quickest way, or that's the most basic way that I use it on a daily basis. So check that out. If Firefox cannot do it, then I strongly suggest have a look at Firefox Developer, especially if you are serious about getting into coding, as you will learn quite a bit about Firefox as well, and it's got some very, very powerful tools for the developers. But this is built in, and like I said, I do speak under correction, but I do not think it is in the standard edition of Firefox anymore. Great. I just want to give you guys one more tip in terms of the your actual HTML. I originally showed you guys how to create links, how to create a navigation to a different page that you can view that page. If you can remember, with my About Us, Gallery, Contact Us. Now, another little nifty trick. Sometimes you do not wish for the page to change, but you do wish for it to open up in a new tab or a new window even. And one of the things that you can do to accomplish that is a very tiny tip, but it is useful at times. So first up, you're just going to go for the Contact Us HTML, just going to say open that up in a new tab. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add target equals, and we're going to go underscore blank. What this will do, whenever I click on that link, it will not navigate away from that page. It will actually open up a new tab. It will open up in a new page. You can also use new, and if I can give you guys a tip, go read up on targets. It's quite useful. I use it quite often for various reasons, not necessarily for live sites, but for navigation when I really need to open up a lot of pages. And just to give you an idea, I'm gonna go contact us, and as you can see, it opened up in a new page. Where I click on gallery, it does not. So yes, have a look at that. That is the second tip that there's third tip that I want to give you guys today. Just going to remove that and take that back to default. Another tip which I wish to share with you guys, go read up on divs. Go read up on those little divs and the power and what you can do with them. They can be rather powerful, they can be rather useful, and you can actually do all kinds of strange things with divs if you do take the time and explore them. I've seen guys layer them and do all sorts of funky things. So another tip, go explore your divs, go explore the capability of divs. What is divs capable of? And not just in terms of plonking them down in your page, but actually what you can accomplish with them using CSS as well, and what you can do with CSS in comparison. So that's a big thing that I actually do want to point out is go check out what you can do with your divs. What is the capabilities of your divs? Because I know that you can layer them, and that's something that I did not know for a very long time until one day I randomly read. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So you can actually layer them. And then I had to learn the technique using CSS on exactly how to do it. So, yes, when you do look at your CSS and when you learn how to use CSS, also focus specifically on the tags, the tag part of it. So I think that's an important tip there. And I'm just want to touch on a few things on styling, and your CSS page in styling. So I'm going to jump to the style page. The first thing that I want to mention, and I know if you guys have started looking around at websites and web pages and learning more, you guys will notice that all the sizes that I spoke about is fixed. In other words, I spoke about a width of 800 pixels. In this example here, you can see is when my window goes smaller than that, then 800 pixels, then I actually need to scroll. And I did that on purpose. It's simply because I wanted to show you guys the basics. Really the basics. Now from here, what I do suggest is start exploring a little bit of responsive design. And I'm just going to show you guys one thing. I actually haven't pre-tested it, but let's have a look. All right, I know my page is from border to border. I am looking at 100%. Let's say that is 100%. That's the full width of my screen. And I said, irrelevant of the full width of my screen, make sure this is only 800 pixels wide. In other words, keep it 800 pixels wide, irrelevant of what. And that, of course, makes or creates this issue. So, in order to quick fix in this case, I'm going to take out the 800 pixels and I'm going to say, okay, of the 100% of my screen width, keep this at, I'm going to say, around 70%. In other words, using a percentage to define the width of your page. Let's just refresh. Okay, it's actually much wider than I thought. But you guys get the idea. But now what's going to happen if I make it smaller, then immediately it is going to adjust to the window size. Thus, if this is 600, 800, 900, it doesn't care. It doesn't care as it's it knows it is 70% of this page width. It will obviously stop at some point because you can only go that small for it in order to work realistically. But yes, that is the main idea behind that. That is stage number one. Now, just to try, just want to try to get it a little bit closer to what it originally was. Okay, that's slightly closer, and as you can see, the same story. So it doesn't matter how big that screen goes, it will always stay at 45% size of the screen. So that's the first thing that you can do to start making your website a little bit more responsive. Now this might not necessarily work here due to these images, and you would need to start. Okay, so there it actually does collapse because we are forcing it to, but now you're starting to have a bit of a problem here. So you're really gonna need to start digging a bit into the code to see how can you get around that. To give you a tip, it's just got to do that. This is images, and it's not really stuck in that space. It's got a specific height of 200 pixels that I told that block to be, so it doesn't matter what happens now. Even if this does push out, it will push out outside the block. But I'm gonna leave that up to you guys to figure out. That is part of the fun bit of learning CSS. However, you do see that it did collapse, and it is collapsing, so it's just this that needs to be fixed up. If you look at the contact us, you have the same problem. So again, I'm going to leave it up to you guys to go back and to figure out how to make these responsive, and that is where responsive design comes in, and it is a very, very important aspect. Everything goes mobile, and you always want it to look, your site to look good on everything. I'm just going to turn this back to 800 pixels and leave it at the default. So that's my other tip. This is very important tip that I'm giving. Responsive design is very important. I specifically didn't go responsive design route, but not so that you guys don't get confused, that you guys can get the basics down. But once you feel comfortable with the basics, start looking at responsive design. That is one example that I have done there on the width. Another quick example, instead of saying 14 pixels, you can say 1M or 2M. I'm not going to go into the details on what EM is. What I can tell you, it's got to do with an actual M. Read up on it, and read up on fonts, responsive fonts, fonts that adapt as with your any other page. Just want to open up. Why did I close this? Close basic web. See there, I said 2 EMs. That's absolutely gigantic. Let's say 1 EM. But this again, this comes down to your font size. Actually, okay, it won't do it now because I have taken out the responsiveness on the frame. However, again, if I start working with M's, then your font size also actually adapt. So yes, responsive design, responsive design, responsive design. It does sound very much like a buzzword, and you're going to run into it everywhere, but it is important. It is to make sure that everything adapts. Your page can adapt and to various conditions and screen sizes that you know it will always look good. Moving on to the next thing on that I want to mention about styling is fonts. Fonts. Guys, I'm made it a point to put fonts in here, and I'm going to tell you guys why. Is for years and years and years, developers didn't really have the option to they were limited to 5, 6 fonts. And I know some of you guys got, no, 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 but you could import it and you could do this. Yes, you could, but it was a pain, it was a hassle. And if there was the tiniest of issue, then the font would not work and so forth. So you were pretty much stuck with 5, 6, 7, or 8 fonts. There is still by default only a certain number of fonts that you guys can use. So I do suggest that you guys go have a look at what is the general fonts available to you. Most IDEs do give you an option on um, what fonts is available by default, but I do know some of them again will show fonts that is might be specifically installed on your machine, but it's not necessarily web capable. So yes, that is one thing to look out for. That's the first thing. And secondly, on how you put these fonts when you put this together. As I briefly explained, it's simply you giving it the main font, you giving it a backup font, and if all else fails, it just drops back to the closest sans serif font it can find. It is just to make sure that there's always a font available. Irrelevant of what, there will always be a sans serif somewhere available. And with the advent of Google and Google fonts, and it just became something new and something amazing, especially to me. So I love it. So this is why I have to tell you guys and I have to give you guys this tip. Go check out Google Fonts. Go learn how to integrate. Simply put Google Fonts, get Google Fonts in your HTML and style sheet. It is not all that difficult. You guys will actually find it very easy. It's quick reference, possibly it's just going to be a link or two in your header, and then you should be able to use it in here in a specific way. But Google it, check it out. Google Fonts, guys. It makes all the difference to the look of your website. You obviously do not want to go too extravagant, but just to give it that little something unique. And that's all I'm going to say about Google Fonts. One of my favorite things. I love using it. I was back in the days a bit skeptic about using it. I didn't know how long it was going to be around. I was so scared. I wake up one morning and poof, everything's gone. But this is Google, and this is many, many years later, and I've been using it for many, many years as well. So definitely that. Then one final thing that I do want to mention in terms of my tips is have a look at your code, guys, at your CSS. Your code in general as well, your index, your contact as your gallery, or any code that you're writing, And I know I'm preaching it and keep about always saying keep it clean, keep it neat. Another thing that I do want to mention, and I briefly mentioned it in the other video as well, and I'm mentioning a lot of things actually today, is that start looking at how you can tighten up your code. First up, in neatness, to make it as simple to read as possible. Secondly, look at your options. Look at how you can tighten up your code. If you let's say two divs that has got exactly the same styling. Now, why do you want to have two divs with exactly the same styling, just making your CSS page longer? And to really try to keep your CSS and that as tight as possible, as short as possible, and as neat as possible. So two quick options. You've got two divs, they do exactly the same thing. So one or two things. Number one, give both of those divs, if they do exactly the same thing, if they are sitting pretty much in the same position, just maybe on a different page, but if they are sitting on exactly the same position, they look exactly the same, even if the actual content might be a bit different, but I'm talking about purely CSS, purely in styling, then give them the same class name. And from there, you know that, okay, cool, that looks exactly the same. If they're exactly the same, give them the same class name, and you can just have one class to deal with in terms of code. So there already you've stripped a bit of coding. That is the one method. And the other method is if you really don't want to do that, even if you specifically want and need to give them different classes for whatever reason that might be, and you can even give them a class and then specify it with an ID. But if you really want to do keep them separate as separate divs with separate names, let's for example like this case here, they do all just doing exactly the same thing. Learn how to combine these. I'm not going to show it in this tutorial. This is just a tip in learn how to combine, how to take things that are exactly the same, even though they've got different classes or maybe even a different ID, and just how to group them together so they do the same thing, they look the same, and that, but you do want to keep their names different. So that's another way as well. I personally do have a habit, and do understand that it's always not the best habit to have, is I sometimes still break it out a lot like this because for me personally it just makes it quicker and easier to read. But I do suggest in a case like this, if I go back and then I will, another term that I've heard is refractor. Refracted this a bit, uh, to crunch them up or to put them together where you use commas and stuff like that. So I suggest also go read up on specifically on that and how to accomplish that. That's also it. I mean, in this alone, you are looking at quite a bit of lines of coding that you can get rid of, and that just makes your code tighter. Cool. That's about it. In terms of resources, I strongly suggest a just one website. It is always at my fingertips. It is my fast, quick reference point from the point if I quickly need to uh, just to again see maybe the specific function of some tag that I want to use. And the first stop that I always use is simply www dot w3 as in the letter schools.com. Guys, check it out. It is an absolutely amazing resource. It covers HTML, it covers CSS, and beyond. It is an amazingly powerful tool. Anything that you can need in terms of HTML, anything, any of these assets or any of these, you can read up on exactly pinpoint exactly on how to use them and the different ways that you can use them, like padding, how to shorten your padding out instead of saying padding top, padding bottom, padding left, padding right, how you can actually make it in one, line. So go to W3 Schools or Google w3schools.com and you will find it, and it's an amazing resource. Is I absolutely go nowhere. I never do any coding without using that. And that really goes beyond HTML and CSS and yes, beyond that. So go check it out. The other resource that I just would like to mention is W3 org, also 3 as in the letter. The reason for that is purely that is the industry standard. That is the good practice book, if you will. There is some boring reading on there sometimes. No offense, w3.org. I love you guys. Um, I read it quite often, but that just gives you a bit of insight into the reasoning behind the standard, why it was implemented like that, and so forth. Great resource. It gets to the core of things. You don't really need to get into that. Me, I'm a bit of a geek, so I like reading deep things and like really understanding why the changes was made and exactly what standard it is. Now, the question is where to from here? What happens next? I've decided to take a bit of a break on how to build your own website for a week or 2. As I've mentioned now numerous times, this is not the end of the series. This is merely the full stop for the HTML and CSS, and there's few reasons behind it. I'm just gonna just browse over it. I really want to get you guys to really, really, really get the HTML and CSS down. That is your foundation. Once you've got that down, it makes everything so much easier. CSS and HTML, I've really been doing this so long that I actually had to go back and go had a look again at some of the HTML and exactly what they were called even. Not because I don't ever use it, I just use it so much that it becomes second nature. Obviously, where you start using, really start getting into things is when you start using your server side languages like PHP and that. So most of your focus goes there. But in this case, it is mostly your index, your HTML, your CSS. I really, really want you guys to get that down like to the core. The second reason behind my logic on also stopping there is I've decided that the next move from here, originally I only planned to stop with the CSS and go, all right, cool, this is it for the series. And halfway through it, I was like, but why? There's absolutely no reason for me to stop it. I can actually take it on a bit to the next level. So what I've decided to do is to when we come back, or when I come back to this after the bit of a break that I'm taking, when we come back to this, I'm actually going to start with JavaScript. I'm going to show you guys a bit of JavaScript. I am maybe going to start working on some menus, how to actually use the JavaScript to do some error checking on the contact form and that. Just to give you a bit of an introduction on JavaScript. And once that is done, then um, well, I'm not going to say once that is done because that's going to be a while, and then we can see where we can take it from there. But this, at this point, is I'm very much focusing on front end development and JavaScript, and I myself have got quite a bit still that I also want to learn about JavaScript. So it's going to be a cool experience for us both. And those are the main two reasons. However, one thing I do want you guys to do understand about JavaScript is merely a markup. If JavaScript, and I'm not going to go into this now, but if JavaScript it is a browser-based language, which leaves obviously room for some errors, JavaScript might be switched off, but I do not want to get into that. And then your website needs to be able to fall back onto HTML and CSS. And this is exactly my thinking and making sure that you guys understand HTML and CSS to the core. And we're just going to upmark with JavaScript. So even if we remove the JavaScript, your website will still work. And this is very, very important. And the third reason, and probably sneaky, my biggest reason is I am really in the mood to do some Linux tutorials. And I want to focus on them for the next week or two. So my channel is not going to be dead. It's not that anything is going to not go up. It's merely I'm just shifting a bit focus. I just want to do a couple of random tutorials and also do a bit of preparation for the JavaScript because we are going to in a little bit of a new level on that. So yeah, that is my main reasons for doing that, and it's not going to be long. I'm saying a couple of weeks. It will most likely be 2 weeks. In the third week I'll most likely have the first JavaScript up. So with that, keep an eye on my channel for the new vids that will be going up on a couple of random things. I know not everybody's going to be interested in it, but some of you will be. There's going to be some Linux goodies. I've got some ideas, but there's one or two things that I want to do that. And do keep an eye out for uh, the new episode where I will be starting with JavaScript on how to build your own website. Subscribe then you guys will be notified immediately when the new stuff goes up, and you guys can check it out i- immediately. And as always, comments and advice is always welcome. And with that, guys, I tell you, thank you very much for joining me again. Thank you for walking this journey with me thus far. And it's just going to do some other crazy things, and we're going to get back on this, and we're going to do some more JavaScript, and then from there we're just going to keep growing it until a point that I go, all right, we have done as much as I can. So guys, thanks again, thanks for watching, and keep an eye out for my new vids. Ciao ciao.